Welcome to the 2020-21 High School League rule presentation. My name is Charlie Winsky, Associate Commissioner at the South Carolina High School League. I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking to you about league regulations pertaining to general sports. Once we get completed with this first 10 or 11 slides, you'll then be turned over to your sport commissioner who handles each individual sport to walk you through the National Federation rule changes and important information. As always, if you have any questions about anything on any slide that we present, feel free to call our office at 803-798-0120. Coaching requirements. Every coach is required to meet the following courses on NFHS Learn, which is concussion course, your heat acclimatization, sudden cardiac arrest, protecting students from abuse. Those 4 courses are required each year for every coach. Coaches, you must complete those courses online one time and do so prior to working with any student athletes. If you're a fall sport coach and you completed them prior to the start of the fall sports season, you do not have to repeat these courses again until the end of the 2021 school year prior to the 2020-21-22 school year beginning. Again, this goes for every coach, whether they are head coach, JV, B team, assistant coach, they're coached there 1 day a week, half a day a week, just come for game days. If they're considered a coach and they work with young people, must go through these courses each year. When you're done with these courses, present your certificate to your athletic director to keep on file. All coaches are reminded that you must be CPR and AED certified. The certification runs for 2 years, so you'll have to get recertified if your certification is up. And once you get certified, remember it runs for 2 years, and then you'll have to get a recertification class. This is to be done prior to working with any sports, whether it be off season or in season. Again, if your certification is going to expire in the middle of the year and you've got a spring or winter sport, you need to re-up your certification prior to going out and working with practice. Medical info, approved healthcare professionals. This is for return to play. For concussions, this is an athlete is diagnosed with a concussion during a contest. 5 listed professionals are the ones who can return that athlete to play. In absence of one of those 5, the student athlete will remain on the bench area for the remainder of the contest and shall not return into the contest under any circumstance. Those 5 approved healthcare professionals are an MD, a DO, an AT, a PA, and an NP. Athletic trainer is going to be your most common one that you have on site. Make sure if you're a spring sport coach or you're a coach that in the fall when you have practice going on outside and you have an indoor contest, you have an athletic trainer, if they're on site, readily available to come to your assistance if in fact you have an athlete is assumed to have a concussion. Other medical info. Wet bulb globe thermometer, implemented I believe last year. Physicals must be dated after April 1st, 2020 to be valid. You need to check with your AD to make sure you have an emergency action plan for all sports at all venues. And immersion tubs or other cooling devices are required for football. I don't know if you can see that given the video down in the bottom right corner. But again, that is immersion tubs or other cooling devices that are required for football. And this must be on site. It does not have to be an actual immersion tub. It can be one of those big cattle water troughs. It can also be a kiddie pool, something that is allowed to hold ice and cold water to submerge the student athlete in the event of high heat or physical heat exhaustion. Again, that is required only for football, and that is new. And now we're going to get into sportsmanship. On our league website at www.schsl.org, under the sportsmanship tab, you can find the following 3 items. PA announcer guidelines, which kind of serve as a guidelines to help your PA announcer throughout a contest on some should and should not do's. There's sample announcements to read prior to a contest and encourage sportsmanship amongst players and spectators. And then there's sportsmanship pledges for coaches and athletes. It's never a bad thing to have your athletes sign a sportsmanship pledge to help hold them accountable to what your goals are in terms of sportsmanship for your program. You need to make sportsmanship a priority. These pledges, these announcements help us make sportsmanship a priority at all of our athletic events and interscholastic contest. Sportsmanship continued. PA announcers, increasing problems in the last few years of our PA announcers that are not promoting sportsmanship. In other words, they're not being professional or respectful. In fact, in many cases, they are cheering for their team only. In terms of how they're announcing the game, it is very one-sided. Oftentimes you hear cheers through the PA system. Comments. We've had PA announcers who've had comments regarding the officiating over the PA system. Remind that person, while they may not be being paid a professional salary in many cases, and most of them are doing it for the love and the enjoyment they have to help support your school and community. Remind them that they're there to be a neutral party, to call the game. Obviously, they're going to have some hometown flavor. Obviously, they're going to have some hometown feel. And of course, they're going to be a little more one-sided in who they want to win the contest. We just ask that you have conversations with your PA announcers and ask them to refrain from cheering but for teams back and forth, and certainly refrain from any comments they're making about the officiating. Music. Make sure you take time to scrub your music that's going to be played over your loudspeaker. Remember, any music or PA announcer or anything that's visible or can be heard is a direct reflection of not only your program, but also your school and your community. We've had several cases in the last few years where pregame music, where there's not supposed to be any parents around or any adults around, it's just supposed to be one team, is played, oftentimes with profanities, sometimes racial slurs, and anything that is deemed unacceptable. So make sure you have scrubbed your music and taken time to explain to your student athletes that all music that's going to be played needs to run through you as a coach or through your athletic department to take out any insensitive lyrics, vulgarity, or profanity that would cause any problems for the other team or any community member. Also be mindful of the communities around you, the homes that are near you, the children that are playing in the yard, and remember your music, your PA announcer, your signs, those are going to be a reflection of your program. Okay, our Living Clean Weeks. Our Living Clean Weeks are a goal for us each year. Well, we've picked 3 weeks a year, and that's 1 week each sports season. And the goal for the school is to have no ejections for that week, and that athletes participate in a community service activity that cleans up their community. And that gets turned into our office by your school that you participated in the community service cleanup. Fall sports, your Living Clean Week, October 5th through the 10th. Again, that week we want to emphasize sportsmanship on the field, no ejections for the entire week at any level. And then we want our athletes in the winter and spring to be participating in some sort of community cleanup. In the winter, your Living Clean Week, January 11th through 16th. Spring, yours is March 22nd through 27th. And again, those weeks we're emphasizing sportsmanship, no ejections during contests or scrimmages, and also to clean up our communities around us. Encourage your athletes to give back and be a bigger part of the community than just living in it. Ejections of coaches and athletes. Reminder, all ejections that occur during a contest must be submitted on an ejection report to the league office. You can find those reports under AD Notebook on the league website. There'll be a tab that says Principals and ADs. Ejection report is there. If you're not sure where it is, contact your athletic director about where to find that report and have it turned in. Coaches, you need to make sure you communicate with your ADs and principals. Last thing you want is them to get a communication from the league office, and that's the first time they've heard of someone that's been ejected from their sports program. Remember, athletes can remain in the bench area. They cannot return to play. If you return them to play in that contest, you'll be playing ineligible, and you will forfeit the remainder of that contest and potentially pay a fine, and the athlete be suspended further or you suspended further as a coach. They can remain in the bench area. Don't ever let an official or another administrator in their school tell you that they have to leave the facility, they have to leave the bench, they have to go sit on the bus, or they have to go to the locker room. This is a supervisory issue and an issue that's going to lead you to court faster than you want to go to court should you send them off by themselves. Now, certainly if you believe they're going to be a hindrance, or they're also going to be a continued problem on your bench area, and you have an adult who's capable of taking them somewhere and supervising them, then we would encourage you to do that, provided that adult is a school employee or a coach with your program. Remember, they're immediately ineligible until cleared by our office. And clearing by our office is either serving the suspension or our office overturning the ejection. Okay, so what that means for you is if you have a tournament that's on a Friday night, Charlie's ejected from the first contest on Friday night, you play again Saturday, haven't had a chance to get back from the league office, don't assume they're going to be overturned. Don't assume that it's just going to be one game or two games or three games. They're ineligible until we've cleared them. In absence of doing that, again, you're risking extending their ineligibility period by adding more games, forfeiting games, and also paying a fine. The minimum ejections for suspensions in football, swim, lacrosse, and cheer, it's a 1-game suspension. Now, these are minimums. 2-game suspension in golf, volleyball, and wrestling, and a 3-game suspension in basketball, baseball, softball, tennis, and soccer. Now, that is new as of 1920. Unfortunately, baseball, softball, tennis, and soccer did not get a full spring season, so we did not get to fully understand the 3-game suspension. We only had about 2 weeks during the 1920 school year. So as we head into the spring, in basketball, you had a year of it. But everybody understands basketball, baseball, softball, tennis, and soccer now have a minimum 3 games. Those are the minimums. If I am ejected for a routine ejection, I am going to get the minimum suspension. Anything above the minimum is because the actions of the athlete require an extended ejection period of time or suspension. Ejections are served at the level the ejection occurs. If Charlie's ejected from a JV contest and you want to move him up to play varsity games, he cannot play any varsity games until he has served his ejection at the JV level, the suspension at the JV level. A second ejection in the same sport is a minimum 2-week suspension, and the playoffs equals a minimum next game suspension in all sports. Now, those are minimums. We can talk about above the minimums at a later time. Coaches, you must submit an ejection report as well. Coaches, you must leave the facility stadium immediately and not return. And you cannot return to coach at any level until cleared by our office. And coaches, all coaches at all levels is a minimum 2-game suspension, and that's the next 2 games you play, and a $300 fine. And that was new last year, and the reason we left new on there is because spring sports, again, did not have hardly any of a season at all. And we want to make sure everybody understands that a 2-game suspension and a $300 fine is the minimum when a coach's ejection. Suspensions must be served where the ejection occurs. Must be served at the level the ejection occurs. What that means for you coaches, if you get ejected as a varsity head coach on a JV game, you're going to sit 2 JV contests before you ever get to coach a varsity game. So understand, look at your JV schedules and understand, if I get ejected from a JV contest, that is going to jeopardize my ability to coach in a varsity contest until I have the opportunity to sit for 2 JV games. You could possibly miss 1, 2, or 5 varsity contests before another JV contest occurs. So you have to ask yourself, is the risk worth the reward? Ejection from the final game of the season for a coach is a minimum $500 fine. Tournaments, preseason contests must be in a tournament that is sanctioned. That sanctioning is done through our league office. Reminder by league definition, a tournament is a series of contests and a competition for a championship, which at least a first and second place are decided by a final contest between 2 teams. So you have to have a bracket with a contest, and at the end of the tournament, a first and second place are determined by 1 contest between 2 teams. Those 2 teams are not known until the other contests have taken place before. In other words, you can't say School A and School B will play in the championship game prior to the tournament ever starting. That is a predetermined tournament which we would not sanction and would not be allowed in the preseason. So to be a preseason event, it must be a tournament, must be sanctioned, and it must meet the definition of a tournament. All tournaments, invitationals, and jamborees must be sanctioned through the league. Any team participating in a non-sanctioned event is subject to penalties and or fines. This goes for out-of-state events, so make sure if you're going to an out-of-state event in one of our bordering states or in a state several states away, make sure that you check to make sure that tournament is sanctioned through the National Federation. In absence of that, you could be looking at a non-sanctioned event and subject to penalties and or fines. All tournaments sanctioned through the league office must be hosted by and managed by a member school. Run into a few issues the last several years where outside groups are wanting to host tournaments and they use a school to sanction the tournament. In some cases, they don't want the school to sanction it, but they ask a school to sanction it, and then the school turns it over to them and says, here, you go run it. Understand, if you are a school that is sanctioning the tournament for that outside group to run, then our expectation is that you are hosting the event and you are managing the event, and that a member of your administrative team or someone from your coaching staff is there at all times to act as a manager of the event. Now, you can let them take the tickets, you can let them sell the ads, take the proceeds, however you want to handle that. But someone from the school needs to be there to manage the event, because we're going to end up holding the school accountable if something goes wrong. Now, brackets to be submitted with any application for sanctioning. Reminder, transfers and eligible players. If a student is not enrolled at your school or feeder middle school for the entire previous year, they are considered a transfer. Don't get caught up into whether they meet a transfer rule or they do not meet a transfer rule. That would be for your principal or athletic director to determine. Just know, better for you to ask them all on the first day. And if you're a returning coach, you certainly know who was not in your program the previous year. Ask them, were they a transfer? Were they enrolled at your school the entire previous year, or at your feeder middle school the entire previous year? If the answer to that question or either one of those questions is no, then you have a transfer potentially on your hands. Turn that name into your AD and or principal. Now remember, to be eligible to transfer must meet one of the criteria for eligibility as stated in the SCHSL bylaws. And then athletes who are not eligible, remember, those athletes can practice, but they cannot dress or participate in a scrimmage, jamboree, or contest. No matter how sweet of a child they are, no matter how wonderful they are, no matter how many extra miles they go for you and your program and all the wonderful things to do. If they're not on eligibility, don't play them. If they're not eligible, don't play them. You run the risk of forfeitures and or fines by doing so. Okay, we have three types of seasons. We have an in season, we have an open season, and we have a closed season. Obviously, in season is your sports season where you have scrimmages, jamborees, and or contests. Outside of that in season period, once your last contest or you are eliminated from the playoffs, you either have an open season or a closed season. In an open season, there are 20 days of practice allowed. School facilities may be used. This must be open to all students, and it cannot be mandatory. Tryouts are prohibited during the open season. Can you evaluate is a question we get a lot. Good coaches are always evaluating their athletes, whether they're in open season, weight room, classroom, or in season. You're always evaluating your athletes or potential athletes. But having an official evaluation period where it's going to weigh into whether they make a team or not, that is prohibited. A mental evaluation, you certainly are allowed to do, but a tryout period or an evaluation period that is mandatory is not allowed. Closed season, coach cannot work with any athletes, and that means on sport-specific skills. We get questions every year. Well, it says I can't work with any athletes. Can we lift weights? If you look down 3 bullets, strength and conditioning activities can take place. A coach cannot work with athletes in terms of coaching them and or teaching them sport-specific skills. Students are not allowed school facilities on their own. No open gyms. Can't open the doors to the gym and say, hey, I can't be in there with you, but the basketballs are in the corner, go shoot during a closed season. You can't open the football facility and say, hey, go run some routes and throw passes during a closed season. Those would be closed season violations. Again, during closed season, no sport-specific skills and or training. Strength and conditioning activities can take place during the entire school year and the entire calendar year, with the only exception being the dead week in July. When we have the dead week in July, which this year we set aside due to COVID-19 pandemic, but during most years when we have the open or the dead period in July, that week around the 4th, that is the only week where no activities may take place on your school grounds, and that includes strength and conditioning. Outside of that, strength and conditioning activities can take place year-round outside that 1 week. So for 51 weeks a year, you can lift and condition your athletes. In the months of June and July, you have open for practice except for that dead week, and all sports are allowed 10 dates of team competition to represent your school. Closed season violations. The penalties for violating closed season. As you can see in the 3 blocks on this slide, Violation of the closed season practice are laid out either by how many days you had the violation or how many occurrences you've had. If you go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday in a closed season and violate it, you will have violated for 3 days. If you violated 1 day in March, 1 day in August, and 1 day in October, you would have 3 occurrences in that sport, and it would fall into bracket number 3. Make sure you pay attention to what your violations are. 1 day in violation, 1 first sport occurrence, it's a $500 fine to the school. Your team's going to lose 1 day of practice at the beginning of your regular season, and you're going to be limited to 1 preseason scrimmage. That means you're going to lose the additional 3 scrimmages and or jamborees that you're in. And when everybody starts on a Monday, you won't start till Tuesday. 2 days in violation are your second occurrence. Again, $500 fine. Now you're going to lose 2 days of practice. So instead of starting on a Monday, you're going to start on a Wednesday. You'll be limited to 1 scrimmage, and you won't be able to host any events and cannot be the home team in the playoffs. So what that means, host any events. It means you can host regular season home contest, single regular season games, single regular season dual matches, single regular season dual meets. Can't host any invitationals. Can't host any large tournaments. Can't host large events, whether you're playing in them or not, jamborees. So you're going to be limited in what you can do on your grounds, and regardless of whether you're the 4th place team and barely got in the playoffs, or whether you're undefeated and ranked number 1 in the country, you're not hosting any playoff games at home. You'll be the road team and placed in a bracket that puts you on the road at all times. 3 days in violation. Occurrence in the sport, or the third occurrence in the sport, I apologize. It's a $500 fine to the school. The team's going to lose 3 days of practice. So instead of starting practice on a Monday, you'd start practice on Thursday. You'll be limited to 1 scrimmage, cannot host any events, and you will be on probation from going to the playoffs for the upcoming sports season. But those are your closed season violations. That will conclude the league portion of the first 10 slides. Again, if you have any questions on anything that we've gone over in these first 10 slides, please do not hesitate to call our office. Our number is 803-798-0120. Any commissioner could help you with a generic question. If it's a sport-specific question, you're not sure who to call, we'll be happy to put you in touch with the right person. Again, always better to ask questions up front and get the right answers. Call our office. Let us give you the right answers. Don't rely on your friends. Don't rely on others in the profession to know what's going on. Call our office. Ask the questions before you're in violation.
The rules of the United States Golf Association shall govern all golf competitions. The league will sponsor championships in each classification that has at least 12 of its schools participating. If this requirement is not met, schools may enter the tournament of the next higher classification. Currently for girls, we offer 3 state championships, and for boys, we were able to offer a championship in all 5 classifications this past year. Varsity golf teams are allowed 16 play dates, including tournaments, 4 scrimmages, and 1 jamboree. Junior varsity teams are allowed 12 play dates and 2 scrimmages. Coaching on the course is allowed, but is restricted to only 1 coach. 1 coach is permitted to coach their golfers anywhere on the course. Any player that receives coaching from anyone other than their designated coach is subject to the following penalties. First offense is a 2-stroke penalty. The second offense is disqualification. Regular season matches shall be limited to 9 holes of play. A total of the 4 low player scores will comprise the team score. Tournaments. For each 18 holes or part played, the total of the 4 low player scores will comprise the team score for that round. The team score for a tournament will be the sum of all rounds or parts played. Scorecards must be totaled, signed, and attested. Each player is responsible for his hole-by-hole score. If the player gives a score over what they made on the hole, the score will stand as recorded. If the player gives a score lower than what they made, they will be disqualified. Under no circumstances should a player keep his own card. The player is solely responsible for the correctness of the score recorded for each hole. Please teach your players the rules for signing inaccurate score cards and remind them to double-check their scores prior to signing. In the event a match cannot be completed, it must be replayed in its entirety or canceled. For tournaments, if the event has to be stopped, all players will mark their ball in an appropriate manner where play is suspended. If play cannot continue the same day, the round will begin from the beginning the next day. If play cannot begin again, the score will revert to the 1/2 round that has been completed by all players. All tournaments will be at least 18 holes. When hosting a tournament, please make sure you are following these rules. Players from the same school will not be paired together. Pairings will be determined by player position as designated by his coach when application is submitted to the tournament committee. Unlimited substitutions may be made between rounds. A round is defined as 18 holes. A team may continue to compete as long as it has 4 players. If a team has fewer than 4 players, the team will be ineligible for team honors, but the remaining individual team players may compete for individual honors. Caddies, ride-on carts, and electric pull carts will not be permitted, but manual hand carts may be used. A request to waive this regulation must be approved by the principals prior to a tournament. Practice on the competition course between rounds is prohibited. Practice between holes is prohibited and will be a 2-stroke penalty. If a questionable situation occurs, a player must play a second ball provisional and request a ruling from the committee at the end of the tournament. If a tie occurs for the champion or runner-up, it will be resolved by a sudden death stroke playoff by the 4 low players on the previous 18 holes. This will begin on the first tee or on the tee as designated by the committee, with all 4 players teeing in the same group, beginning with the number 4 players and progressing in order to the number 1 players. Individuals tied for a position will be resolved in the same manner. Rangefinders and GPS devices will be allowed in match and tournament play with the following stipulations. In each pairing, if any player uses the device, then all players in the pair will have access. If the player does not allow other members in the pairing to utilize it when asked, will be disqualified for serious breach of etiquette. Devices that calculate slope in addition to yardage are not permitted and will result in disqualification. Cell phones are not to be used on the course. Use of cell phone will result in disqualification. Cell phones may only be used in an emergency situation. The girls' qualifier will be October 21st. The following sites have been secured. Please make note of your classification and where your qualifier will be. This information will be posted on the website the 1st of October with tournament information provided by the host school. The qualifiers are an 18-hole event. Check the South Carolina High School League website for information for qualifiers for girls golf. Qualifiers are scheduled for October 19th. Each classification will have how many teams that qualify for upper and lower state tournaments. So check for that information on our website. The state tournament will be October 26th and 27th. 5A will be hosted at Country Club of Lexington, 4A Barony Golf Club, and 3A will be at Carolina Springs. Information for both the qualifiers and state tournament will be posted on our website on the golf page. The South Carolina Golf Association is a great website to get further information for the major rule changes that went into effect this year. You can also use the South Carolina Junior Golf Association's website as well for information. Both websites will have information for rule seminars, PowerPoint presentations, simplified rules, sample local rule sheets can be found on these websites. Champ Williams, is a contact person for the South Carolina Junior Golf Association, and you can see his office phone number is listed there. Please contact Champ if you have any questions during this season regarding any rules pertaining to golf that fall under the USGA rules. Good luck this season. All information that was shared today can be accessible on the South Carolina High School League website in the Handbook and Rules section for golf.